spoke, but Hetty was an exception. She could wait. Above all for lettuce. She found a comfy place at the foot of the hilly landscape. Not too warm and not too cold. Cosy, but not claustrophobic. She could grow to like this place. However, after some considerable time had passed and no lettuce had appeared, Hetty had had enough of waiting around. Apart from that, the hills next to her, that had started out as pleasantly temperate, had got colder and colder, uncomfortably cold, and the flies were starting to get on her nerves. To start with, it was only 2 or 3, and Hetty had ignored them in true tortoise style, but now there was a whole cloud of them, circling overhead. Buzzing, ducking and diving, flitting around the hills, and Hetty herself, when one of the flies had the audacity to land on Hetty's head and tried to drink out of her eye, the tortoise shuffled indignantly out of her place and walked through a strangely sticky, metallic-smelling puddle and out into the afternoon sun again. Chapter 1. Edwina's Biscuits. The doorbell rang, and Agnes Sharp abandoned the search for her false teeth, simultaneously pleased and annoyed. Pleased that she'd even heard the doorbell. Her ears hadn't really been playing along recently, and sometimes all she could hear was a high-pitched, nerve-jangling ringing, accompanied by a rushing sound. So, the doorbell was a welcome change. On the other hand, it would be quite embarrassing to open the door without the aforementioned false teeth. Unclear and toothless. But the caller had to be gotten rid of before he had the idea of going snooping around in the garden, teeth or no teeth. "I'm coming! Just a minute!" Agnes bellowed into the hall. Then she sallied forth. Out of the room, mind the threshold, and then the stairs. A step forward, a step down, then bring down the other foot. A vertigo-inducing moment without any sense of balance. A deep breath, then gather courage for the next step down. And so on, 26 times. "A minute, my foot!" The doorbell rang again. Her hip grumbled. The doorbell rang once more. "Just one moment, for God's sake!" When she reached the first landing, a real rage had built up in her, towards the stairs, the caller, the renegade false teeth, but also her housemates. Why did she always get the difficult jobs? Like scaling the stairs, or taking out the bins, or absolutely everything. Edwina would have made it down the stairs somewhat quicker, but she would, of course, have been useless at the door. Bernadette was sitting in her room, crying her blind eyes out. At this moment, Marshall was mostly somewhere on the internet, unreachable, connected to the computer as if by the umbilical cord, and you obviously couldn't expect Winston to attempt the descent without the stair lift. Why had nobody repaired the stupid stair lift? Then Agnes remembered that it had been her job to call for it to be repaired, but with her unreliable hearing and her aversion to the telephone, she had kept putting it off. It was her own fault then, as so often seemed to be the case these days. The only scapegoat left was the caller, and her rage towards him was mounting. She had mastered the last step and was dragging herself to the front door with a calculated slowness, accompanied by the doorbell's staccato chimes. Did they think she was deaf? What was the buffoon playing at? What did they even want at this time? And what time was it, anyway? Agnes fumbled briefly with the latch, then threw the door open. She would have liked to give the caller a piece of her mind, but nothing came to her. "Yev," she snapped. She didn't quite carry it off, and got even more annoyed. Miss Sharp?" The caller peered rudely past her into the house, a bloody whippersnapper with officious glasses and a briefcase under his arm. This couldn't be a good sign. Agnes crossed her thin arms, while the whippersnapper switched on a winning smile, rather too late. "Miss Sharp,